Hi guys, so I got quite a few questions today on the increasing and decreasing intervals as well as the positive and negative intervals. So I just wanted to go through a quick reminder and just go over what those different intervals mean in terms of a graph and how we write those intervals as inequalities from the graph. So the first one we're going to look at is the increasing and decreasing intervals. And the increasing and decreasing intervals is where our graph increases increases. So where the graph goes up as it goes to the right and where it decreases where it goes down as it goes from left to right. So you can see that on the left side here, our graph is decreasing, 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 and then it hits this value here, and at which point it turns around and begins to increase. So we can see again that the graph is decreasing as it comes from the left side of the coordinate plane, and it decreases and it decreases and it decreases until it hits this value. Now keep in mind that we're looking for the x values for which our graph is increasing and decreasing. And so at the spot where our graph stops decreasing, that would be here at our axis of symmetry, and this is where x equals 4. So we have to be very careful to make sure that the value we use when we write our intervals is the x value and not the y value at the vertex. Okay, so again, we're reading from left to right. So this axis symmetry is kind of like a wall that we hit that causes our graph to flip the other direction, whether we're decreasing from the left to the right or increasing. That would be the same thing. We hit the axis symmetry and it turns back around. So our graph is coming from the left side of the coordinate plane. We've talked about this at length, and we know that the very left side of our coordinate plane is negative infinity. So the left side of our graph is coming from negative infinity way over here to the left. Those are our negative x values, so negative infinity. And it comes from negative infinity, and it's decreasing, and it's decreasing, and it's decreasing. And then it hits, again, our axis of symmetry, which is where x equals 4. So the decreasing interval is from negative infinity to positive 4. So we write that as an inequality to represent that interval where negative infinity is less than x, which is less than or equal to 4. And again, that's our decreasing interval because our graph is moving downwards as it goes from left to right. Then on the other side of the graph, where it turns around, starting at that axis of symmetry, our graph begins to increase. So our graph begins to increase, again, at that axis of symmetry where x equals 4. And it increases to the right, it increases, it increases, it increases, and it continues to increase to the right as we approach positive infinity. So for that interval, we begin increasing where x equals 4, and we increase all the way to the right. And so there's the beginning and end of that inequality for that interval. So we write that as 4 less than or equal to x, which is less than positive infinity. So decrease as we go from left to right, our y values are decreasing, and increase as we go from left to right, our y values are increasing. So that is increasing and decreasing intervals. Now we have positive and negative intervals. So what we're doing is we're looking to see on the graph where our y values are positive or where our y values are negative. So on the graph, we know that our y values are positive here, our y values are negative here, and we separate those with the x-axis. Above the x-axis is where our y values are positive, and below the x-axis is where our y values are negative. So if we look at the graph, we can see that this separates our parabola into 3 different pieces. So we have this piece here, which is positive. It's above the x-axis. These y values at any point on this piece of the graph are positive. And we have this piece here, which is also positive. At any point on this piece of the graph, our y values are also positive. So we're going to write two separate intervals to represent these two pieces of the graph because we've divided it up into three pieces. So first, if we look at this left piece, this piece is coming again from the left side of our coordinate plane. The left side of our coordinate plane comes from negative infinity. So this piece comes from negative infinity and it's positive all up here, but it comes down as it approaches the x-axis, and then at this value here, it is no longer positive. It hits the x-axis and then it goes to the other side, which would make it negative. So this piece of the graph is above the x-axis or positive from negative infinity to this value of x, which is 2. So that interval will be negative infinity less than x less than 2. Now, we don't say that it's equal to at 2 because we're saying that this is where our graph is positive. And at 2, our y value is 0, which is neither positive nor negative. So we will not say that it is equal to at either of those values. Then you can see our graph dips below the x-axis, but it turns around and it comes back up. So we can see that up here, our graph turns green again, and we have another piece that is now above the x-axis. Now that rises above the x-axis here at 6. So our graph becomes positive again at 6, and as it goes all the way to the right, it's positive. So that interval for the other positive piece is going to be from 6 less than x less than positive infinity. So those are our two positive pieces. The remainder of the graph, this piece below the x-axis, again, those are where our y values are negative. So this is the negative interval of our graph. This is where our graph is negative or our y values are negative. But again, we're looking for the x values that represent where our graph is negative. So what are the x values for which our graph is negative? So our graph begins to be negative where x equals 2, and it is negative, negative, negative. Again, it turns around and it begins to approach the x-axis again, at which point it crosses over the x-axis and is no longer negative, so it stops being negative at this value of x, which is 6. Our inequality for that is going to be 2 less than x less than 6. And that is positive and negative intervals.